Hi, everyone. My name is Kelvin. I'm from the marketing team here at Rival Technologies and Reach Through Insights. Welcome to Outliers. This is an educational event series that we've created where we bring in research leaders and marketing experts to talk about some of the hottest topics in the insights world today. Today, we have Cherie Leonard from Colgate-Palmolive. But before I bring her in, I just want to give everyone a quick overview of what you can expect, just in case this is the first time that you're joining us. Outliers, this is really a very informal, informative, and interactive session. So, the first 15 minutes or so, I have a list of questions that I'm going to ask Cherie, and then the last 15 minutes really are meant for audience Q&A. And so at any point, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat feature here on Zoom. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that at the end of this event, we will have a chat survey that we're just gonna send over the Zoom link here. I would appreciate it if you could take it. It's very short. I programmed it myself. It's 5 minutes. It will be mostly about this event series and then just ideas for future sessions. So that will really help us shape the content. Okay, so without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Cherie Leonard. She is Associate Director of Foresight and Sustainability Insights at Colgate-Palmolive North America. Hi, Cherie.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. You've been at Colgate-Palmolive for over 10 years now, but you formally started your role in Foresight in March 2020. What an interesting time to start. So can you give us some perspective on how that was like for you, starting this new role during a time when so many things were about to change?
Yes, absolutely. So a bit chaotic, as you might expect, but we first started talking about the role and the creation of this Foresight team, a few months earlier, right? So it was definitely pre-COVID. And so I was, charged with this, building a new team as part of the division, and the first one at that time, in the Colgate world, the first one to have Foresight. And I kind of, was viewing it as the analogy. I was jumping into the deep end of a pool, but it was a familiar pool, right? I'd been around Colgate for a while, kind of knew, the business, the priorities. And lo and behold, like a month later, when I actually started the role, which was March 5th of 2020, so literally just before lockdowns, everything had changed, right? And it felt like instead of being in the deep end of a pool, I was in the middle of the ocean in a storm, and not really kind of having my feet under me just yet. So I think with this situation, definitely some challenges, but also some opportunities. And I think on the challenging side, it was a situation of, quite frankly, we were like building this ship while we were sailing it. Like it was just all at once. No time to kind of jump in and create a vision and that sort of thing. It was just go. And it was all kind of COVID and everything to start. So, the vision, the pillars, the roadmaps, all of that was kind of happening as we were already running full steam ahead. The flip side of that and the positive side was just there was an incredible amount of eagerness and exposure within the organization to start. And, everybody all of a sudden was saying, oh my, we have Foresight. Tell us what's going to happen with COVID. Tell us what this coronavirus is. And, what does this mean for our categories? What does it mean for consumers? Is the world ending? Like, what's going on? So there was this certainly engagement and anticipation from the organization. So a lot of the internal building momentum and sell-in was a whole lot easier because people were eager for it. And I think the other really fun and rewarding part of it is from day one, we were working on big BD topics that were business critical. So a lot of the ramp up didn't necessarily hit in the same way that I had expected.
Wow. Yeah, sounds like a very interesting time. And, we're still in it, right? So that's super interesting. Now, your role actually is a combination of different roles. As I mentioned, you're responsible for Foresight, which, we're going to be talking a lot more today about. But you're also responsible for sustainability, innovation, and most recently, Omnichannel insights. That sounds like a lot. But, and for me, I don't necessarily see the thread there. So maybe give us an overview of how they complement each other and why you've taken on all of these.
Yeah, so I think at first glance, it's right. They feel like they're kind of all over the spectrum. But I'll kind of start and go through in the way that I see them building on each other, because I actually do see a thread in how they can impact and influence. So starting with foresight, that's our opportunity to identify big strategic opportunities for us at a very cross-category level. So this work tends to be very foundational. We're looking at macro forces and trends and weak signals and things like that. But it's happening at a cross-category level and really looking to identify what are those different, what could the world be like, and what are those different opportunities for us within those scenarios. And what I really found fulfilling, especially at the beginning with a very strong focus on sustainability, was that sustainability wasn't just like one piece of it or one scenario, or it's happening kind of over here in isolation. It really became a pretty critical part of kind of all the foresight work we're doing, because it will in some way, shape, or form be impacting the world ahead of us. And so, as an organization, I think for many, many years, we've had a pretty strong team and strong expertise in sustainability on the R&D side, on the manufacturing side, supply chain. But when it came to the consumer side, we were not as consistent in being grounded in some of the foundational insights. And I think this was an opportunity to bring that to the surface. And certainly through COVID, like a really interesting time with how people are thinking about sustainability and prioritizing it and not, and that sort of thing. More recently, I've taken on an innovation role as well. And that's actually a really clear link to foresight. One of the things I love about foresight is I really try to push our stakeholder influence beyond marketing and innovation into obviously R&D, but also human resources and supply chain and other partners like that, sales teams. But fundamentally, a key stakeholder is the innovation team. And by me taking that on, it's also an opportunity to create that bridge. One of the things we learned earlier on in the foresight journey is that it's really important to have a clear link back to the commercial business. So you aren't just kind of thinking about these topics in vagaries and really having something, a little bit more concretely grounded in the business challenges and realities. So with innovation, I'm able to do that. And I'm focusing actually on Horizon 2 innovation, which is a bit more disruptive. And, it is focused on opportunities where there's consumer behavior is required and things like that. It's a little bit more, disruptive and rare in the categories. So, I think the foresight and kind of future context is really a nice complement to that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And
Thanks. And then
yeah,
Omnichannel is the thing, the final
yeah,
thing.
Omnichannel. That's been a much more recent add to the repertoire. And I think there too, I'm finding opportunities to create the links. I think it's going to be an ever evolving sort of space, but very much I see an opportunity to build that in with H2, with Horizon 2 innovation, especially. If I think about some of those opportunities where we're looking at innovation that might require very much a behavior change on the part of people, think about some options that might have both a product and a service that impacts our distribution channels, right? So a lot of those links, I think, are there in the omnichannel mindset as we're thinking about how consumers are navigating their space, their whole purchase journey, as well as actually, finding the product or the service. I think the other place where I see omnichannel really playing a role as well is when we think about innovation that is more on the sustainable side. If you're thinking about things that are really tapping into the circular economy, we're looking at refill solutions, different packaging, subscription models, fundamentally different, more eco-focused business models. And I think there's a link there as well to some of the other pieces of the role.
Right. Cool. Okay. Thanks for that overview. Yeah, it sounds like a lot. And but definitely, with your explanation, I can kind of see the relationship between all of them. So that actually makes me even more grateful for your time today, because obviously you're a very, very, very busy person. I want to double click a little bit on foresight, because that's what we promised people we're going to talk about. Foresight is still something very new in the insights world. At Colgate-Palmolive, it's about 2 years. From your perspective, what exactly is foresight? And maybe give us an overview of your responsibilities, your day-to-day, your mandate. as a foresight leader?
Yes. So I think ever evolving. I'll kind of start by saying that. But we did build out a vision for foresight, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, some kind of pillars and what that looks like in terms of focus areas. But to start with, the vision as we've crafted it is to identify potential opportunities for brand growth and vibrancy by anticipating what people will need or want in the future. And three key points there. I think the first is brand growth and vibrancy, because really we're doing this to drive growth, right? It might be fun to think about the future and the what if scenarios, but ultimately the reason we're in business is to drive growth. So that's an important link to the business. Secondly is the word anticipating. And I purposefully shy away from the word predicting. I think that that's often tossed around in the world of foresight, and I understand why. But for me, the idea of anticipating is much more powerful. It's more powerful because I think there are several different scenarios of what the world could look like in any given topic that we're exploring. But the other reason is I actually think it's more empowering. Yeah. If I'm sitting in a brand's shoes and I'm like, it's a prediction, it's a yes or no, it's we're there, we're not, and it feels a little bit more reactive, versus if it's anticipating, I think it puts the power in our hands a little bit, and we can be empowered to be the change, right? And to make some of the transformations. And so I think it's a more positive and empowering space. And then the last point there is just people, right? And I try to be very people centric, and our organization does as well, in making sure that we're focused on needs and priorities and kind of the shifting world that people are living in, as opposed to just relying on like what happens to be in the R&D pipeline 5 or 10 years down the line and trying to force fit that back.
Yeah, I like the word anticipating as well, because that implies that you can help shape it.
Yes.
Whereas predicting just means you're kind of following it. Now, just a follow-up question, you also had the word vibrancy there. Was that like, how intentional was the addition of that word? Maybe you can just give an overview of that as well.
I can. So it's intentional. I would say growth is the number one focus for mostly everyone at the moment, and most times in business. But the vibrancy is an important piece too, because that to me is where the brand relevance comes in people's lives. And if I think about our equity tracking, that is a measure that we track is vibrancy. We don't just want to kind of show up on shelf and be there as a given option, but rather there has to be something about the brand voice and what we stand for in terms of purpose that brings vibrancy and brings relevance. So to me, I see that pretty linked.
Right. Cool. Very cool. The other component that I want to talk about is timing. So, we probably have several people here or people who are going to watch the recording thinking about, is it time for us to establish a foresight function? So maybe if you can give us some thoughts on, what prompted the company to invest in foresight finally, and just how did you guys lead to this decision?
Well, fortunately, it was pre-COVID when the decision was made. So I think that was beneficial that I was in place just as it started. But with that being said, I think from my perspective, there are probably three kind of key forces that really drove to kind of the emergence of foresight. The first being the fact that there's a very rapidly shifting marketplace. We've seen in the last few years several new data-driven, highly relevant, highly engaging challenger brands that have entered and really kind of changed the way people shop and the way people interact with certain categories in hygiene, in beauty, and things like that. Secondly, we're in an age of disruption, right? And I think it's the idea of thinking about different scenarios for the future is really critical for businesses as we think about the very different directions it could take. It's influenced by, leaps and bounds in technology and the way that people are interacting, the health infrastructure, changes in social or political power shifts, changes in climate change legislation, evolutions in the metaverse and things like that. So I think there's a lot of different forces at play here, and thinking about taking a very proactive approach to thinking about what those different scenarios could be and what that means for our business is important. And then just at a third point, kind of building on the idea of disruption, like it's happening and it's happening everywhere, and it's happening across many, if not all, industries. And I think we think very carefully about being the disruptors and not being disrupted. And our categories are very long-standing. We're quite established players in many of them, but we don't want to kind of sit back and use that as a reason to, play it safe, I guess. So it's been an opportunity to think a little bit more proactively about how to be disruptor. So if I think about all those things together, I think it lends itself to the emergence of a more specific focus on foresight.
Right. Cool. And you touched on this a little bit already, but you look at various data sources. You mentioned things like changes in politics and stuff like that, and regulations. But yeah, one of the things that you do really is like look at various data sources and then integrate them and then make sense of them. And so that sounds like a big task. Can you share how you do that in a systematic way, in a way that leads you to anticipate, look at several different potential futures?
Yes. So I think just to take a step back for a moment, one of the things I love most about this space is the type of sources that you can tap into. It's different than kind of traditional marketing research in many ways. And it's just fun and interesting and very relevant to even us as individuals in daily lives. So I typically take like a 3-step process. I start with landscaping, I do some integration, and then it's scenario building. And starting with landscaping, I think if I go back to our vision for foresight, there are kind of 3 key areas or components that I try to triangulate, and that's people, that's culture, and that's category. And I really, in the landscaping phase, try to focus on how do I bring in perspectives from each of those 3 areas. And so I kind of start there, and depending upon the business question and the challenge, the actual resources look different, but obviously you can imagine it's oftentimes cultural trends, macro forces. I look to semiotics and what's happening, in popular culture. It might be music or fashion or literature or things like that. Also at the big picture level, anthropology and academia. Oftentimes we see some things starting to bubble up in academia and eventually making its way more to mainstream. Certainly social listening, big data, 1P data, a lot of that type of thing to get more of an understanding of how are people talking about certain topics. The 1P data, how are they actually behaving in our categories? Behavioral science principles we often tap into as we're thinking about behavior change. Even NGOs, right? And looking what's on the docket for legislation and certain things. So I think those are a lot of different resources in addition to consumers. And I purposely didn't mention them, first, because we may bring them in, leading edge consumers, but they're never the only ones. And the reason being it's, we love talking to them for inspiration and ideation and just to understand their daily lives. But, none of us are very good at predicting, and we can't ask them how they're going to brush their teeth in 5 years or 10 years, right? And they probably can't tell us what they're going to have for dinner tonight. So I think, we just try to be a little bit cognizant of like where and how we use them. And we really try to be thoughtful about the different pieces that come together. And then the third piece of that is just, developing the scenarios. And I think that's really between the integrating and the scenario development where I really try to look for certainly patterns and kind of momentum in certain places. But really importantly too, where am I finding contradictions and where am I finding some tension? And I think that's sometimes really where the beauty lies in terms of diving a little bit deeper into some of the opportunities for transformation in categories.
Interesting. Can you give an example of that, like the contradictions?
So one example I can give is actually bridging into the sustainability piece a little bit. And I think as we see obviously a lot more brands taking on sustainability, communication and packaging and opportunities like that. But, I think if we think about the world around us and what happened during COVID, one of the big tensions and really a tug of war for many people was the fact that, sustainability was quite important, right? They were seeing cleaner air, cleaner water, fresher skies, all of that sort of thing. It became important through different lenses and kind of the impact of the environment on lockdowns in a positive way. But yet this sense of panic, right, about personal hygiene and safety and protection for my family. And so it's like, on the one hand, people had this great desire to do good things, buy from good brands, reduce their trash, all these things. But on the other hand, they're like, well, but God, I'm scared enough to go to the grocery store. If I go in there, I'm okay buying an apple that's wrapped in plastic because I want to make sure it's clean. I remember there were times early on when everyone was like Lysoling everything that came in from the grocery store. And so I think you start to see those tug of war ideas, intentions, even in the small day-to-day tasks that people might be doing. And I think sometimes that's where you really, feel out some opportunities to meet a consumer need and to kind of meet them where they're at.
Right. Yeah, cool. If anyone here has questions for us, please let us know. Is there anything else that you can share regarding sustainability? So, because I know that's a big part of your role as well. So you already talked about that contradiction. What other trends are you seeing?
So I'm seeing, certainly an expanding of the definition a bit of sustainability. I think, the kind of starting point for many people when they hear that word, or eco-friendly, or whatever kind of iteration you're thinking of, it tends to be very environment and earth focused. And they might think climate change, or they might think trash or plastic or whatever it is. But that definition, also with all of the social things that were happening during COVID and things like that, I think the definition is expanding. And as people think about sustainability, it now also includes social good and environmental activism and things like that. So I think with that expansion, I see two different evolutions of sustainability. And one is more in climate justice, right? We see a lot, vulnerable populations in many cases are the ones who unfortunately are most impacted by climate change and things like that. So I think we're going to start seeing more conversation around that. There's certainly more of a call for brands to show up differently, to show up with more, affordable for the masses kind of options that are sustainable. Certainly governments are being called on for reparations, for climate reparations. So I think we're starting to see some more of a, social and environmental activism kind of come into play. But then the second evolution that I see is all about consumption, and a more conscious consumption. And I think that's an interesting challenge for us as manufacturers, and potentially for many people on the line as well, because generally speaking, we grow our brands and our companies by, selling more or selling at a higher price. And I think this idea of more is a little bit at, is a little bit at odds with people kind of taking a step back and saying, do I actually need more, or do I need different? Do I need to use less of this? Can I dilute it if it's, a product in my bathroom or a product in my kitchen? Do I need to use it at all, right? And I think we're starting to see a lot of that with some of the household categories. So I think between those two things, we're going to really see a difference in how sustainability is being discussed.
Cool. I think Natalie has a question. Natalie, would you mind going online, or do you want me to just ask the question on your behalf?
I'm actually driving at the moment, but I'll be happy to say something. Interested. So I work in an organization that's really focused on upstream technology development. Interested to know how, you didn't mention those as part of your 3 sources, and was wondering how that enters into your analysis.
With the technology in particular?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it definitely is kind of what I see as some of the macro forces. We look at, if we're thinking about like the health space in particular, right, the evolution of technology, what is the role of AI? A lot of that comes into play as we're doing our landscaping, trying to understand more what's in the culture at large. So I think and there are many different sources for that. We tap into Institute for the Future as one of our partners, and as well as some of our other kind of the larger partners in the insights world in terms of foresight. But bring in that technology lens, especially as it relates to behavior change and expectations for more of a fluid interaction, I would say, between what's happening digitally and what's happening in kind of physical life. And I guess one example I'll give of that is, electric toothbrushes, right? That's a category that that is very much impacted by technology. And that might be a little bit more here and now, but if we think about the future and how expectations of healthcare and dental care and things like that will be impacted by technology, that's certainly an area where you think about kind of a product service sort of interaction or integration.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome. I have a question as well. So if, you obviously you were like in market research and then you transitioned to foresight. I mean, you still do insights, but just curious, if there was someone who was trying to consider like a market researcher right now, trying to get into foresight in particular, what set of skills or what kind of preparation do they need to do in order to take on a role like this?
That's a good question. So I think curiosity is a really big one because we don't know the answers. I think be curious about what different sources you can use, right? So I spend time on Indiegogo or Kickstarter, things like that. Just like, what's out there? What are these life hacks that people are trying to do? What problems are they trying to solve? So I think being curious about different areas, like you can get inspiration or ideas from anywhere. Strategic thinking, it is definitely one of the more strategic roles I've had in the organization, simply because you tend to think cross-category and bigger picture and business strategy, right? Like where are those areas where we should be placing our bets? And the other thing I guess I would just say is comfort with ambiguity, right? And some people love it and some people don't. But I think that there's a lot of time spent like working through the ambiguity, and it is like the art and the science, which is a bit of an overused phrase, but I think it's really true in terms of how you're piecing together some of these different things and oftentimes live in a bit of a space of ambiguity. But I would say probably those three things. And that's I guess what I love about insights and the research world overall is it is always evolving, and there are always these new areas popping up, and this is one that I think is really sets our function up as a true strategic leader as well.
Great. Cool. Well, Cherie, thanks so much for your time. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect and continue the conversation.
Cool. Are you speaking at any conferences soon? Just curious.
I'll be at TMRE at home, which is the virtual one, in a few weeks, and then a few more come summertime. So hope to connect with you all in the future.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much. And we'll post the recording shortly after this and share it with everyone who registered. And of course, it will be available on YouTube as well. So thanks again, Cherie. And we'll chat with you guys next week.
Nice to see you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, that was good.